2003. Stanford University, California. A sophomore named Elizabeth Holmes walks into a professor's office and says she is leaving to start a company. She is 19 years old. She had an idea, and she believed it completely. A single drop of blood, taken from a finger, could run hundreds of medical tests at once. No needles, no vials, no waiting. A person could know what was happening inside their body from one small prick. It was a beautiful promise. But a hard question sat underneath it from the very first day. Could a single drop of blood really do all of that? For a long time, almost no one asked it out loud. Holmes had a personal reason, or so she told it. She was afraid of needles, and she spoke often of an uncle who died of cancer that was caught too late. She said she wanted a world where no one had to say goodbye too soon, where a single test could catch disease before it became fatal. It was a powerful story, and she told it well. She named the company Theranos, a blend of therapy and diagnosis. The promise was simple enough to fit on a business card. The science underneath it did not yet exist. The pitch had specific, thrilling numbers. From one tiny tube of blood, Holmes said, the machine could run hundreds of different tests. Cholesterol, infections, cancer markers, all from a drop. The little container that held the sample even had a name. It made the impossible sound like engineering. Holmes dropped out of Stanford and put her tuition money into the company. She was young, focused, and relentless. She wore a black turtleneck almost every day, the same uniform Steve Jobs had worn. She spoke in a low, steady voice. She told everyone she met that she was going to change medicine. People who met her remembered the intensity. She rarely blinked, they said. She worked long hours and asked the same of everyone around her. She had a way of speaking about the future as if it had already arrived. Belief in those rooms was the whole product. Investors listened. The story was irresistible. A brilliant young woman leaves Stanford to save lives with a machine the size of a desktop printer. Money began to arrive. The early money came fast. Venture investors, family offices, and wealthy individuals wrote large checks based mostly on Holmes herself. She was persuasive in a way that made doubt feel small. Few of them asked to see the machine prove itself under independent eyes. The machine had a name. It was called the Edison. It was meant to sit in a pharmacy, take the drop of blood, and return results in minutes. That was the promise, printed in every pitch. What the Edison could actually do was a different matter. Holmes built a board of directors unlike any in Silicon Valley. It was filled with famous names. Former Secretary of State George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, the future Defense Secretary James Mattis, former senators and generals. These were statesmen, not scientists. Very few of them understood blood. But their names carried weight. When a former Secretary of State vouches for a company, people believe. The board gave Theranos something it badly needed. It gave the promise credibility. By 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Holmes owned half of it. On paper, she was worth about $4.5 billion. She became the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. Her face appeared on magazine covers, described as the next Steve Jobs. The praise grew louder. She gave a TED Talk. She appeared at conferences beside presidents and prime ministers. President Obama named her an ambassador for American entrepreneurship. To the public, she was proof that a young woman could build something world-changing from nothing. Almost no one had seen the machine work. But the number was fragile. $4.5 billion existed on paper, and only because everyone believed the machine did what Holmes said. No independent scientist had confirmed it. The whole tower rested on a single, unproven claim. Then came the deals that would put the blood tests in front of real patients. Walgreens signed on. The plan was to place Theranos wellness centers inside its stores across the country. Walk in, give a drop of blood, walk out. The pharmacy chain committed a large sum and began building the centers. The grocery chain Safeway spent hundreds of millions preparing to do the same. For the first time, the machine was no longer a promise made to investors. It was going to touch real people, with real illnesses, waiting on real results. The first Theranos testing centers opened to the public in Palo Alto and in Phoenix, Arizona. Ordinary people began coming in for blood work ordered by their doctors. They trusted that the results were sound. Some of those results were quietly being produced by the very machines Holmes said her company had replaced. Inside the company, one man stood beside Holmes at every turn. His name was Ramesh Balwani, though everyone called him Sonny. He was the president and chief operating officer. He was older than Holmes, and he ran the company with a hard hand. Employees learned to fear him. What almost no one outside the company knew was that Holmes and Balwani were also a couple. They had been together for years. They kept it hidden. Theranos ran on secrecy. Employees signed strict agreements and were kept from talking to one another about their work. Teams were walled off, so no single person could see the whole picture. Those who asked too many questions were often pushed out. Fear did the work that transparency should have done. For a company built on a single idea, everything depended on that idea being true. If the drop of blood worked, Theranos was the future of medicine. If it did not, then every dollar raised and every test sold rested on a lie. By 2015, the answer was starting to leak out, and there was a deeper secret, one that sat at the center of everything. The Edison did not work the way Holmes said it did. The little machine could only run a small number of tests, and even those were unreliable. It could not do the hundreds of tests the pitch promised. When investors and partners came to watch a demonstration, the finger prick would go into the machine as promised. But behind the scenes, the results shown were not always real. On some occasions, samples were run elsewhere, or a normal result was displayed while the device quietly failed. The demonstration was a performance. So Theranos did something it never told the public. For most of the tests it offered, it did not use the Edison at all. It used ordinary commercial blood analyzers, the same machines any lab could buy. To make a finger prick drop fit those machines, technicians diluted it. That dilution could push results outside the accurate range. This meant that real patients, walking into real pharmacies, were sometimes getting results that were simply wrong. For some patients, the wrong number had real weight. A test might suggest a health scare that was not there, or miss a warning that was. Doctors made decisions based on results they trusted. The machine at the center of it all was still not the machine Holmes described. Not everyone was fooled. A few scientists who looked closely raised quiet doubts. A respected lab expert warned that the claims did not fit what was known about blood chemistry. But warnings without proof are easy to ignore, and Theranos guarded its proof like a state secret. Inside the labs, people noticed. Quality control tests were failing. Results that should have been steady jumped around. Some employees raised their hands and asked how this could be allowed near patients. One of them was a young man named Tyler Schultz. He was the grandson of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State on the board. He had joined Theranos believing in it. What he saw in the lab frightened him. He tried to raise concerns inside the company. He was pushed back. He took his worries to his grandfather, who did not believe him over Holmes. Another employee, Erica Chung, saw the same failures and reached the same fear. Speaking up cost them. They faced pressure, legal threats, and the fear that comes with challenging powerful people. Careers could have ended before they began. But they had seen something they could not unsee. Results going out to patients that the company could not stand behind. These were young people, at the start of their careers, standing against a $9 billion company and a board of the most powerful men in the country. It would have been easy to stay quiet. They did not. Their concerns reached a reporter. His name was John Carreyrou, and he wrote for the Wall Street Journal. He began to pull the thread. Theranos did not want the story told. The company hired one of the most feared lawyers in the country, David Boies, to guard its secrets. Sources who spoke to the reporter faced legal threats and surveillance. Tyler Schultz spent months and a great deal of his family's money defending his right to tell the truth. In October 2015, the journal published his first story. It said, plainly, that Theranos was not using its own device for most of its tests, and that the results might not be trustworthy. The article landed like a hammer. At first, the powerful closed ranks around Holmes. Partners hesitated. Some investors kept their faith. The company insisted the reporting was wrong and that its technology was real. For a few months, it looked as if the story might not stick. Theranos fought back hard. Holmes went on television and denied everything. The company threatened lawsuits. For a while, the machine of names and money held. But regulators had started to look. The agency that oversees medical labs sent inspectors into the Theranos facility in California. What they found was serious. The lab, they said, posed immediate danger to patient health. In 2016, the regulators acted. Holmes was banned from owning or running a blood testing lab for 2 years. The company was forced to void or correct tens of thousands of test results it had already sent to patients and doctors. Walgreens ended the partnership and closed the wellness centers. The deals that had put the machine in front of patients collapsed. The Safeway plan was already dead. The money began to vanish. Theranos had raised close to $1 billion over its life. Among the investors was Rupert Murdoch, who had put in more than $100 million. He lost nearly all of it. Others lost the same way. In March 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Holmes with massive fraud. It said she had deceived investors for years about what the technology could do. She gave up control of the company and paid a penalty. That September, Theranos shut down for good. The $9 billion company was worth nothing. The fall was total. A company once valued at $9 billion was gone. Hundreds of jobs disappeared. Investors who had trusted Holmes wrote off enormous sums. And the doctors and patients who had relied on Theranos results were left to wonder which of their tests had ever been true. But the civil case was not the end. Federal prosecutors had been building a criminal case. In 2018, Holmes and Balwani were both indicted on charges of fraud. Her trial began in 2021 in a courthouse in San Jose, not far from where the company had started. For months, jurors heard from investors, patients, and former employees. They heard about failing tests and hidden machines. Holmes took the stand in her own defense. The defense told a different story. Holmes's lawyers argued that she had believed in her company to the end, that failure was not the same as fraud. She testified that Balwani had controlled and mistreated her for years. Balwani's side denied it. The jury had to decide what she knew and when she knew it. On January 3rd, 2022, the jury returned its verdict. It found Elizabeth Holmes guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. On the charges tied to patients, the jury did not convict. Balwani was tried separately and convicted on more counts later that year. In November 2022, a judge sentenced her to 11 years and 3 months in prison. Her release is projected for sometime in the next decade. Balwani entered prison as well. The board of statesmen faded from the story. The magazine covers were quietly forgotten. On May 30th, 2023, Elizabeth Holmes walked into a federal prison camp in Texas. She was 39 years old. 20 years earlier, she had left Stanford certain she would change the world with a single drop of blood. The drop of blood had promised everything. The machine had never worked.